I have never posted anything like this before. I am not the kind of person who shares things on the internet, but I have been carrying something for almost 30 years, and I cannot do it alone anymore. In 1996, I was working as a contractor in the high desert of eastern Oregon, mostly repair work. Cabins, fire towers, old ranger stations. The kind of jobs nobody else wanted because they were too far from anywhere and paid next to nothing. In October, I got a call from a Park Service office asking if I could spend 2 weeks repairing a ranger station deep in the mountains. They said the place had been abandoned since the late 70s. Nobody told me why. The station was about 40 miles from the nearest paved road. No power, no phone line, just a dirt track through pine forest and canyon country. The building was worse than they described. Half the roof had collapsed. The walls were black with mold. Rat nests were in everything. The place felt wrong from the moment I stepped inside. Not haunted. I do not believe in that. Just heavy. Like the air had not moved in a very long time. On the third day, I was pulling rotten shelving out of the station office. Behind the shelves, I found a door. It was narrow, set into the wall like it was built with the station and then covered up later. The hinges were rusted shut. I had to use a crowbar. Behind the door was a small room. No bigger than a pantry. No windows. It had concrete walls, which was strange because the rest of the station was timber frame. Someone had built this room differently on purpose. There was a metal desk, a broken chair, and on the floor, a wooden box. The box had no label and no lock. It was heavy. Inside were dozens of file folders. Some were typed on official Park Service letterheads. Some were handwritten on notebook paper. Some were just scraps folded and tucked in. The oldest file was dated 1931. The newest was from 1982. Over 50 years of reports, all hidden in the same room, all passed down from one head ranger to the next. And every single folder had the same stamp across the front in red ink and block letters, D.O. not file. I did not read them all that night. I read 5 or 6, sitting on the floor with a work lamp plugged into my generator. 5 or 6 was enough. They were incident reports that somebody had decided should not exist. Disappearances. Hikers, campers, hunters, families. People who walked into the backcountry and did not come back, or who came back wrong. They were found miles from where they should have been, confused, injured, and unable to explain what happened. The details kept repeating. Camps were found intact. Gear was untouched. And the boots. Always the boots. They were left behind in the tent or beside the bedroll, placed neatly. It was like the person had taken them off, set them down, and walked into the dark barefoot. It happened not once, not twice, but across decades and across different parks. Different rangers wrote the reports years apart, none of them knowing the others had seen the same thing. But someone knew. Someone collected these files, hid them behind a wall, and stamped every one of them with the same words. I should have put the box back. I should have sealed the room and driven home. Instead, I loaded the box into my truck. Something happened on my last morning at that station. I woke up early, maybe at 5:30. I stepped outside and looked down at the ground in front of the door. The dirt was soft. I had been tracking my own boot prints in and out for days. I knew what my prints looked like. These were not mine. They were bare feet. Bare footprints started about 10 feet from the front door. They were not coming toward the station. They were leading away, toward the tree line at the edge of the clearing. They crossed the clearing in a straight line and disappeared into the trees. There were no prints coming back. I was 40 miles from the nearest road. I had not seen another person in 4 days. I finished the job, though I did not sleep well. And when I drove out, the box was in the back of my truck. I never handed it over. I never told anyone what I found, not until now. I have carried this box for almost 30 years. I have gone back to it dozens of times. I have read more of the files and compared them. I found patterns that span decades and stretch across the entire country. The boots, the distances that do not make sense, the caves that nobody wants to talk about, and the people who tried to report what they saw and were quietly moved aside. People are still going missing. Every year. The same way. In the same kinds of places. I have started recording myself reading through these files. All of them. In order. I need there to be a record that cannot be stamped and buried. You can find the recordings. I do not know if anyone will listen, but they are there. I will change the names, the locations, and the dates. Some of the people in these files still have families, but the stories themselves stay, because somebody should know. These are the buried archives. My parents have a strenuous relationship, to say the very least. My father has been a hardcore Christian since he himself was a child. Sunday school, daily Bible study, that whole thing. He actually met my mother at his Christian school. She had transferred there after being expelled from her previous academy for nearly weekly fights, and my father's school was the only one that would take her. According to him, though, she didn't show even an ounce of disrespect or rebellion during her time there. No fights, no hooky, hell. Apparently she wouldn't even curse on school grounds. They met in his chemistry class. She sat in the front row directly beside him, and I guess close proximity created affection between them. Thank God for science, right? She kept up the whole innocent schoolgirl routine all the way up through graduation. From there, the two of them married not even a full month after the ceremony, then boom, they have a me. I think that's where the strain really started. A child in your teens is not something that relaxes you, obviously. Father actually had to take up another job just to support us. What did mother do? She stayed home all day and watched over me. Well, I say watched over me. Really, all I remember from those days is her getting lost inside her books. The books she read looked ancient, almost leather-bound, wrinkled yellow pages, and no matter how often she read them, they seemed to always be covered in dust. Now, being the 5-year-old I was, I had no idea what she was doing. All I knew was that mother liked to read a lot. It wasn't until I hit 12 that my curiosity bubbled over and caused me to actually look at what she had been reading. She kept most of them hidden, locked away in her closet, and stuffed behind her clothes. It was almost fate that I stumbled upon them that day. It was late November, and of course, I just had to know what my gifts were going to be that year. Where better to check than the closet, right? I was disappointed when I found nothing but clothes and the scent of mothballs, but something told me to dig deeper, that I'd find exactly what I wanted if I just kept looking. That's when I found them. Books on black magic, demonology, witchcraft, all manner of darkness. The air around me felt thick and heavy, like I was being watched, but I couldn't see by whom. As I stared at the books, still a little confused as to what I was even looking at, my heart fell into my stomach at the sound of the bedroom door opening. I clumsily hid away behind some of the clothes, and by some miracle of God, Mother didn't see me when she stepped into the closet. She must have been blinded by her need for the books, because her hand literally grazed my shoulder as she reached down to grab one. She shut the closet door behind her, leaving me alone in darkness as I waited. I could feel my heart beating out of my chest, and all I could do was wait for the perfect moment to escape. As I waited, Mother started to read aloud from the book. Her words made no sense to me, but I could feel the evil in her words as she read. It sounded like gibberish, a language that was completely incomprehensible to me, but she was chanting it like she'd done this 1,000 times. Suddenly, the light on the other side of the door began to glow brighter and brighter. The room shook, and with each passing second, the entire house got louder and louder with what sounded like thunder. Mother kept chanting, repeating the same foreign phrase over and over again. Through the noise, through the blinding light, she just kept chanting. On a dime, all of the noise stopped. The light on the other side of the door reached a peak before dying out entirely. For a moment, there was silence, deep, uncomfortable silence, until a new voice spoke, the unmistakable voice of a man. "This is the 3rd time today," the man spoke. I could feel the bass of his voice in my chest as he continued. "Sooner or later, your husband's gonna catch on." "That idiot?" my mother replied. "He's too busy working to even notice that his son looks nothing like him. Now, are we gonna do this or not?" I heard the sound of clothes hitting the floor before my parents' bed began to rattle violently. Faster, and faster, and faster, before slowing down to a soft, methodical rock and then dying down completely as the smell of sulfur filled the room. "Wow," gasped my mother. "No wonder they call you the prince." "Oh, don't you worry, honey," responded the man. "Once that son of ours is 18, he'll be the prince, and you and I will rule for eternity." Yeah, I know. Gotta have an heir before you're king. The rules down there are all so confusing. Anyway, you should go. We were so loud, he's probably gonna come in here at any moment." "Fine." With another flash of light and a whir of thunder, the room fell silent once again. I remained hidden in that closet for what felt like an eternity before my mother finally went off into the house to look for me. As sneaky as could be, I made my way to the bathroom where I pretended to be sick so as not to draw suspicion. I never told father about what I heard, what I saw. I just kept living like everything was normal. However, I'm writing this now because my 18th birthday is in 1 week, and I have no idea what's in store for the party. The manner in which he carried himself spoke of confidence. Listening to his voice was akin to a running river at sunset, hypnotic and memorable. Clearly, his etiquette charmed and delighted me on the first eve of our meeting in the shadowed gardens of Orvet. The last moment I knew him, however, he was far less the charming, well-spoken gentleman he had presented himself as. I can still feel the unmistakable pain of my heart shattering. The emotion encompassed my being as the first blow connected to my head. Much to the shock of Valerius, I did not fall. I simply smiled sadly, masking my crushed spirit. His face betrayed the fear he meant to remain hidden as my jaw unclenched and my pearly white canines connected to the flesh of his neck. I refused to cast even a glance at his prone figure as I departed the velvet halls of Everil. The tears slid down my face, mingling with the warm, red liquid of his life force. Very quickly after that experience, I learned to distrust the charming mannerisms of human beings. Never again shall I fall for a foolish ruse such as that. I will continue my life throughout the centuries, invoking my own form of justice upon those whom I deem worthy of my insatiable vengeance. This world requires a cleansing that cannot be brought about without inflicting the retribution this earth deserves. Before anything, I must be clear. I am 100% mentally sound. None of what I'm about to tell you is a figment of my imagination, and I'm not going to let any of you make me believe otherwise. For 20 years, I was on the force. I started out as just your everyday rookie cop and climbed the ranks to lead detective through blood, sweat, and a desire to be the best. I am not crazy. What I am, however, is a man who made a mistake that has grown to haunt me as the weeks drag on. I should have never gone searching. I should have never let my pride stand in the way of my good sense. A mere 6 months before my retirement, a photograph was brought to my desk. Little Yelkia Nozreve, dressed to the nines for her second-grade school photos. The image portrayed her perfectly, exactly how she was as a person. It's an image that, no matter how badly I want to, I'll never forget. She wore a snaggle-toothed smile, and her dirty blonde hair had been curled like that of a pageant star, with a light lavender sundress to tie the look together. Atop her head rested a bright red bow, making her completely picturesque. My partner, Detective Holnurapli, tossed the picture down onto my desk before running a hand over where his hair had once been. "We got a sad one today, champ," he sighed sarcastically. I responded with a quick ash of my fading cigarette. "When are they not, Urapli?" There was something different about this one, though. I could feel it. I could see it painted all over Urapli's face and body language. CCTV footage picked this little girl up right outside the corner store off Retrack Street. She looked to be wearing her pajamas, and I'm not the biggest expert, but the poor girl looked confused as hell as to where she was. I stared at Urapli for a moment, pondering, choosing my next words carefully. "Well," I finally managed, "do we have the tape with us? I'm going to need to have a look at that, of course." Yereply simply nodded before retrieving the tape from his inner suit pocket. He popped it into the VHS player that I kept in the office for situations just like this, and together we watched the tape. I recognized what he meant by her being confused almost immediately. The way her eyes and head darted around, almost as though she was trying to piece together not only where she was, but how she got there in the first place. The video was time-stamped at 3018 in the morning. That's what made this footage so chilling. No sign of who dropped her off. No sign of a parental guardian. No sign of anything. Just a little girl who just so happened to stumble clumsily into the camera's frame. At approximately 3025, Yelkia very noticeably snapped her head behind her, as though someone had been calling for her. Ever so slowly, she turned around and walked timidly toward the direction of the supposed noise. This was the last anyone had ever seen of her. Her parents were destroyed, and her elementary school even held a vigil for her, begging for her safe return. Yereply ejected the tape from the player, and the two of us sat together brainstorming our next move. We were going to pay a visit to that store off Retrick Street. We rode together straight there, silent the entire time. Retrick Street is in a less than desirable part of town, far from Yelkia's address, and when we arrived, we found that the place was buzzing with people, which was sure to hinder our work. However, one swift flash of the badge fixed that problem right up, and soon the parking lot fell empty. With the peace and quiet, we were finally able to conduct our research. Well, we would have, if it weren't for the damn store owner pestering us every 5 minutes with questions that we simply didn't have answers to. Is the girl okay? How long will this take? Will you two be here tomorrow? He went on and on, so much so that Yereply and I had to politely ask to be left alone for a smoke break. Whilst we stood there puffing on our cigarettes, something caught my eye just outside of my peripheral vision. It was a color that stood out against all the others. I tossed the cigarette and stomped it before walking over to the mysterious object that had been stuffed meticulously into the store's downspout. As I neared, I felt knots form in my stomach as the object became ever so clear. I knelt down and heard Yereply gasp as I pulled a tiny red bow free from the tube. Holy hell, I thought aloud. Yereply must have been thinking the same thing, because before I knew it, he was right by my side. That's not what I think it is, he added. I think it is, unfortunately. The true gut punch wasn't the bow, however. What made my and my partner's blood turn to ice was the note that had been fastened to the bow with a clothing pin. Do not look for me. It was evident that this was not Yelkia's handwriting, and this single discovery is what pushed the trajectory of my life straight toward demise. Yereply instantly phoned for backup while I analyzed the bow, completely entranced. The next thing I knew, the entire surrounding area was swarming with police presence. There had already been search teams dispatched, but those had been scattered. Some were around the elementary school, some were around her home, and some were right here with us. Now, however, every single search team had flocked to our location, and the entire property was being scouted with magnifying glasses. For hours we looked, hoping for something, anything that would point us in the right direction. Daylight drained quickly, and by the early morning hours, I was the only person who remained. I made the conscious decision that I was going to go home. I needed rest. If Yelkia was alive, and if I was going to be of any help to her, I needed to be sharp. That drive home tormented me. I couldn't get her face out of my head. I couldn't wipe the scenarios from my mind. Before I knew it, I had autopiloted my way home. I glided straight to my bed and collapsed face first into a deep, dreamless sleep. I awoke at 9 a.m. to the sound of knocking on my front door. However, when I checked a peephole, there was no one there. Opening the door, I found that there had been a package left carefully on my welcome mat. This immediately threw up red flags because I hadn't ordered anything since last Christmas. On top of that, the packaging was completely blank, just a scuff-free cardboard box that weighed less than a pound. I felt a sneaking suspicion that this was related to my case and, based on intuition, decided to take the box with me down to my office. I phoned Yereply to let him know I was on the way, and on the drive there, curiosity ate at my brain like a war prisoner who had finally found his way to a homemade dinner with his family. I had to have been followed. There was no other explanation. I racked my brain trying to remember anything from the drive home the previous night, but all I could recall was my deep thought. I then became paranoid. Paranoid at what could possibly be hidden within the package. Paranoid of what possible state Yelkia could be in at this very moment. And, as if listening to my thoughts like a symbiotic parasite, the box began to faintly tick. This is where my paranoia won. I could no longer risk driving to the office. I pulled my car into a desolate parking garage, free of cars and people, where I then phoned in the bomb squad. I let them know about the package, the case, and filled them in on the ticking that could now be heard from the box. They instructed me to vacate the premises and await their arrival, which I did. 10 minutes later, the entire squad showed up, as discreetly as possible, so as not to create any public concern. I watched as the man in the armored suit approached the package slowly, surely sweating from the nerves and early autumn sun. Very carefully, the man cut the tape from the box and opened the flaps. The silence of the outside world was deafening, and I seemed to only be able to hear my own heartbeat before the man broke the silence with a quick yelp as he jumped back from the box. "It's a finger," he cried out. "Small one, too. Looks like it came with some kind of timer." It felt as though all the oxygen from outside had been snatched away through a vacuum in space and time. My lungs burned, and I felt my face grow beet red. The noise around me faded to static as I watched my colleagues scramble to examine the box. I could do nothing but stand there. It was as though all of my expertise and professionalism had been lost, and I knew deep down in my heart that so had Yelkia. The next couple of hours were a blur. The package had been brought back to the station for fingerprinting and analysis while I remained in my office, contemplating. The ticking of the clock on my wall drove me mad to the point where I had to remove the batteries and continue moping in silence. That poor girl. That poor, poor girl. So many questions were left unanswered, and our only other leads had been taken in for examination. All that remained was the videotape. Mustering up the strength out of my discouragement, I finally found it within me to watch the video one last time, just to search for something, anything, that could hint at where Yelkia had gone. I rewound the tape 4 separate times, scanning the grainy footage ferociously. On the 5th rewatch, I saw him, hidden nearly completely out of frame behind a tree at the forest line, directly behind the store. Exactly where Yelkia had cocked her head curiously before disappearing entirely. He beckoned her over with a wave of his hand, barely visible unless you were looking with the intensity of a father who knows what it's like to lose a daughter. What haunted me the most, however, was the fact that that man was me. Same wrinkles, same graying hair, same face. I thought that my eyes deceived me. I thought that my imagination was corrupting my interpretation of the grainy footage. But no. 6 times I rewound the footage to the moment my face came into view, becoming more and more recognizable each time. It was unmistakable. Just at the very moment I rewound for the 7th time, Europli came flying into the office, startling me as I raced to eject the tape. "You know, knocking is still a thing people do," I announced, annoyed. "Positive match for Yelkia on that finger. I've already let the parents know, and the search teams know that they're looking for a body at this point in time. It's hard to imagine what kind of game this sick fuck must be playing, but it's nothing we aren't prepared for." I rubbed my temples, feeling my mind race at 1,000 miles an hour. This was a predicament that I certainly was not prepared for. On the one hand, if I told Yelkia what I'd seen, he'd immediately believe me insane, which I am not, and have me arrested until the body was found and more evidence was discovered. I knew I didn't do this, but how could I argue my case? On the other hand, if I didn't say anything and the guys found it on their own, man, there'd really be no coming back from that. Weighing my options made time seem to freeze in place. The ticking from my clock brought me back to reality, and I chose not to let on what I had seen. "We're prepared for anything, John, no doubt about that. You find any fingerprints?" "Not a one," Europli replied, defeated. "We'll find her, alive or dead, eventually," I responded, doubtful. "Well, let's hope. We have all of our resources dedicated to this girl. I pray for God to align the right stars." "I'm praying too," Europli. And with that, John left me alone in my office once more. Alone in silence. And with that silence came more paranoia. I was now willingly withholding critical information from a child abduction and possible murder case just to keep myself safe. The feeling devoured me. Someone was going to find out. Hell, it'd probably be Eureply. He's always the one closest to me. Or maybe it'd be Kiktim Ilkam, the head of forensic analysis. Whoever it might be, I knew it was coming. There was no running from it. Oh, I'd be damned if I didn't try, though. I decided to take the tape home with me. It would be more secure that way, away from sniffing noses and prying eyes. For the next week, I called out sick. Near perfect attendance for 20 straight years. I felt I'd earned that right. During that time, I dove deep. Deep, deep. Day in and day out, I researched Yelkia. Being a mere second grader with a regular middle-class family, I can't say I could find much online for the first few days. I found out who her teachers were, learned that she was born in Einrafalak before her family moved down here to rural Agro-Egg, maybe stalked a few social media pages. I say maybe, but the truth is, that's where the next big break came. And unfortunately for the nose raves, it was more evidence I'd have to keep to myself. As I looked through the pages of Yelkia's distant relatives, a message popped up on my screen. Do not look for me. Immediately I clicked the message, and upon entering the chat, an image was shared. I swear to you, I promise you, I am not crazy. I did not do this, and I am begging you all to believe that. The image revealed Yelkia, huddled in the corner of a dark concrete room. Her pajamas were tattered and torn, her hair matted and dry. But perhaps most heartbreaking of all, she looked to be holding her right hand, crying in pain as blood trickled from the stump where her finger had once been. And there, towering over her, smiling a demonic, unnatural smile directly into the camera with eyes as black as sin, was me, yet again. A new message then popped up below the image. Do not look for us. And that was it. That was the moment reality began to unravel for me. Only briefly, however. All things can be explained, and that was my outlook on this entire situation. Clicking on the account, I found that it had been entirely dedicated to Yelkia. 30 posts so far, and each of them begging for her safe return. All except for one. The post read, "Rest in peace, Yelkia. Heaven has gained an angel," followed by some tacky emojis that I don't care to include. However, what I found interesting about this post is the fact that it had been uploaded 2 hours before news broke of the finger being found. That was damning. But what was I to do? Who was I to turn to when all evidence pointed to me? I decided to take a shot in the dark. I responded to the user. And you know what I said? Where all of my training landed me. A text message that read, "Who is this?" Fucking laughable. Shockingly, the little scene icon popped up beneath my message. I felt my heart begin to tick metronomically as I awaited the reply. Tick. Tock. Tick. Tock. 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 Staring at the screen, I felt only moments pass as my thoughts raced. But as if the universe were mocking me, I heard urgent knocking from my front door. Checking my watch, it was now 1047. Fucking. Hours had gone by. It could not have been possible. I was not fucking losing it. I couldn't be this late into the investigation, not with everything that was at stake. Cautiously and confused, I opened my front door to find Eureply. His face told the exact story I had been dreading, and then his words sealed the deal. "Hey boss, have you seen that VHS tape? Some of the boys down at the office wanted to take a second look at it, but we can't find it anywhere. Thought I'd seen you watching it in your office, but when I checked it wasn't there. Also, why did you take those batteries out of the clock? Tell me what's going on, man. Nobody's heard from you, and we're starting to worry." "I'm fine, John, and no, I haven't seen the tape. I'm pretty sure I'm contagious right now, so I'm not sure I'd want to be around me if I were you." I tried shutting the door, but John pushed it back open with force. "One more thing, sorry. We found an interesting social media account. Figured you'd probably want to take a look at it. Why don't you come with me down to the office? We can get this all figured out." "I don't think so," you reply, feeling far too ill at the moment. There was a brief but uncomfortable pause. "We found some fingerprints, man. Look, I just need you to come down to the office with me, okay? Please? Can you just do me this one favor? I knew exactly what this was code for, and immediately that ticking of my heart came back. Okay, John, I'll do you this favor. Let me get decent, and I'll meet you in the car. Thanks, buddy. We're gonna get this all figured out, I promise you. What do you think I did? Do you think I granted him his favor? The back door, it was for me. Knowing what awaited me at that office, I walked with intention. I decided that I'd stick to the woods for complete discretion. As I walked, I thought about many things. Yelkia, my own daughter whom I'd lost, what the inside of a prison cell meant for an officer of the law such as myself. I continued well into the late hours of the night, trotting to the pace of my own beating heart. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what to do, mostly. All I felt the need to do was walk. I eventually found myself approaching civilization again when the bright light post of a corner store parking lot came into view. Worried about being seen, I ducked off behind the trees as I proceeded forward. As the store came further and further into view, I noticed something that made my heart fire up with glee. Little Yelkia Nosreve, standing alone and looking confused. I watched her for a while, thankful that I had finally found her. I had finally done what I set out to do, and here she was, alive and well. As I called out her name, she twisted her neck around to meet my eyes, and I gestured her over with a wave of my hand. Yelkia is safe now. I've decided to keep her until I'm able to make heads or tails of who her abductor was. But until then, I promise to your Ply and to anyone else reading this, Yelkia is safe. She will return as happy as she's ever been, but for now, please, do not look for me. Every town has its mysteries, a kind of darkness the citizens would rather keep locked away from outsiders. I am the opposite. I love exposing the inner darkness of everyday life and bringing it to the surface. It is why I joined the local true crime club in my town of Orem. It is called the Enigma Vault. The members gather to talk about favorite crime cases that do not get much media coverage. We also discuss the occasional conspiracy theory and potential cryptid sighting. I guess you could say we are just a bunch of horror-obsessed geeks looking for our next thrill. Some would say what we are doing is messed up, but you need something to make you feel alive when you live in a boring city like this one. At least, I used to think it was boring. There is this strange daycare in Orem called Little Sprouts Academy. It has been here for decades, but nobody remembers seeing anyone enter or leave it. You cannot even hear the sounds of children playing when you walk by. The building is painted a garish shade of green with bright yellow window frames and purple doors. All the windows are covered so you cannot see anything inside. Everything about the place is incredibly sketchy. It is a total enigma that nobody has a read on. One day I chatted with a post office worker to see what he thought, and he said something that stuck with me. He has delivered mail there a few times, and apparently, there really are children inside. The weird thing is that it is always nap time whenever he arrives. Mail carriers can have hectic schedules, so he has been at Little Sprouts Academy at several different hours of the day, but the children are always fast asleep no matter what time it is. It does not matter if it is early in the morning or later in the afternoon, those kids are knocked out. Curiosity was making me go crazy with all kinds of different possibilities. What if all those conspiracy theories were true and those children were being experimented on? I talked it over with my club, and they agreed that something was off. Little Sprouts Academy was shaping up to be the perfect topic for our next podcast. Another member and I stood outside the daycare late at night, wearing black clothes and balaclavas. The mission was to break inside and record everything we found. I know. Breaking into a building because of rumors is totally dumb and reckless. Most of the club members are not normal people. We are so bored with our mundane daily lives that we search for adventure wherever we can. Sometimes that means stepping face first into danger. I am obsessed with solving mysteries, so when a huge enigma like this exists in my own city, you bet I'm going to crack the case. Some say Little Sprouts Academy is a human trafficking ring. Others swear it is a secret government base. I did not know what to think, so I went searching for the truth. My partner used a lockpick kit to get us inside while I used my phone's flashlight to navigate. Compared to the outside, the interior was barren and sterile. It was immaculately clean, like a hospital. There were none of the colorful drawings or posters you would expect from a daycare. We walked into what seemed to be an office area. There were tons of these strange files about the children. Each one described their psychic potential and how well they performed on aptitude tests. Students with low potential were disposed of, and some even had mental breakdowns and were moved to other facilities. The students with high potential were called ascended beings and considered prime candidates for the harvest. We were seriously beginning to freak out. The psychic experiment theories were true, but it was far bigger than what we could imagine. Our cameras captured everything. There was proof of it. I then heard a low groan coming from a door to my left. I opened it, and it revealed a long flight of descending stairs. It must have been the basement. A strong wave of a horrendous odor attacked my nostrils. It smelled inhuman. The stench was terrible enough to make bile rise to the back of my throat. Then I heard it. A voice coming from deep within the basement. "Help us. Let us out. Please give us a second chance. We will pass the test this time. I miss my parents." The voice was barely above a whisper, but it sounded like it belonged to a child. We booked it out of there and made an anonymous call to the police. We hid in the shadows at a safe distance as squad cars rolled up to the scene. Officers entered the building, and when they came out, there were no children with them. They just left them there. I know for a fact I heard a child call out to me. Nothing came of that encounter. The police have done nothing to investigate Little Sprouts Academy, no matter how many of us call them. Those bastards must be accomplices or something. The daycare is still up and running like normal. I still think about those children to this day and what exactly is being done to them. I am thinking of going back there soon with the entire club to see if we can rescue them. There is more to this story waiting to be told. An eraser pinged off my head for the 5th time in 2 minutes. I could practically feel the steam wafting from my ears. I took a deep breath, praying that Honij Nalrarg, or Honij Garbage as I like to call him, would get bored eventually and find something else to pass the time. But then another chunk of eraser bounced off my temple. "One more time, you fucking douchebag. One more time, and I'll..." A mechanical pencil smacked the back of my skull. I lost it. I turned to Honij Garbage, my face as red as a fire engine. "All right, look here, you stupid shit. I have had enough of your crap. My mouth fell open. All eyes were on Honij. A thick tension had overtaken the lecture hall. The only noise over the deafening silence was the sound of Honij desperately gasping for air. He clawed at his throat, his eyes bulging as if some invisible hand had a stranglehold on his neck. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And neither could my classmates. "All right, Honij, it's time to stop messing around. Keep it up, and I'll send you to the dean's office," Mr. Rierpa said, arms crossed. But he didn't stop. If this was a performance, then Honij had some serious acting chops. But as we would soon find out, Honij wasn't a talented actor. Mr. Rierpa didn't believe it until Honij was lifted 3 feet into the air. A collective gasp escaped from my classmates as the boy floated above us. I continued to look on helplessly as Honij's face turned blue. Eventually, I turned away. I couldn't stomach it any longer. I absolutely despised the guy. But he didn't deserve that. I heard Honij's body hit the ground with a sickening thump. His eyes remained unblinking, and he had blood around his mouth. I felt sick. My classmates gathered around, and Mr. Rierpa pushed through the crowd. He felt for a pulse but found none and started CPR. "Someone call 911 and get the AED," he shouted. Students scattered, trying to make themselves useful. It was then, amid the chaos, that my eyes landed on the nerdy student who sat at the back of the room. He shot me a wink. My heart dropped as he mouthed the words, "You're welcome." As mothers went, they didn't come much prouder than Sarah Morin. "It's so good to meet you, Lin Su. Please tell me if I got that wrong." No, Mrs. Morin, that's perfect. Sarah, a tall, well-built blonde woman, pulled the small girl in close. And then she saw her son Sam back from college, finally, and took his handsome face in her hands. My little prince. A winner, she continued, a born winner. Come on, Mom, Sam replied. But there was no real protest in his voice. No, Lin Su answered. My parents are Chinese. They probably wouldn't say they were proud of me until my second Nobel. Sam, have you told her about the Hail Mary at Oak Ridge? The pass of the century. If you won't blow your own horn, I'll blow it for you. Lin Su turned to see if he reacted. He was a little arrogant, but no more than your average 21-year-old frat guy. That deserved at least a mild cringe. And the math Olympiad, she continued. What did they call your solution? Vieta jumping, Mom. Too complicated for us mere mortals. She squeezed Lin Su's leg. Yeah, Lin Su answered. I don't know trigonometry from optometry. That always got to my dad. A dark look passed over Mrs. Morin's face. Sam's so-called dad. We don't talk about him. Lin Su felt like she was stepping on all the grenades. A heads up on the way over would have been nice. Decision-making? Sarah Morin tapped the table. Pandora bracelet jangling. That is what separates winners. And you know, sweetheart, I've met a lot of Sam's girlfriends over the years, and you're my favorite. After dinner, Mrs. Morin brought out an old photo album labeled The Little Prince. And then on to home movies made into a supercut soundtracked by Taylor Swift's Never Grow Up. In truth, Lin Su was feeling a little sand out, and then Mrs. Morin shot up. You've got to see his trophy collection. Sam shrugged his broad quarterback's shoulders as if to say, Mom's gonna mom. But Lin Su couldn't shake the feeling this was extra. He treated the new pledges a little regally, but this? He was like Joffrey and Ralph Lauren. Mrs. Morin almost scooped up Lin Su, moving deeper into the house and then pushing open a final door. The first thing that caught her attention was a shrine. There was no other word for it. There was a black and white photo of Sam, lit with candles, and beneath, a sacrifice of sunflower petals. And then Lin Su paused because her attention was yanked away to a central cabinet where she expected to see all his winners' medals, cups, and ribbons. Instead, she felt the cool press of Mrs. Morin's hands on her shoulders. Then, a squeeze. His trophy collection, she continued softly. On the shelves, beautifully backlit, were numerous locks of hair, assorted pieces of jewelry, and the driving licenses of several young girls, Lin Su recognized from the news. I work as a social worker for the County Adult Protective Services Division. My job consists entirely of stepping into situations that other people would rather ignore. I deal with severe neglect, extreme hoarding, cognitive decline, and, most commonly, financial exploitation. When an elderly person has a steady pension and a house that is fully paid off, the worst elements of human nature tend to surface. Usually, it is a distant relative who moves in to help out and ends up draining the bank accounts. It is a miserable, exhausting profession, and it teaches you very quickly to trust your instincts when something feels wrong. The file landed on my desk on a late Tuesday afternoon. The referral was classified as an anonymous tip from a concerned neighbor. The details were sparse but alarming. An elderly woman, a widow living entirely alone on the far edge of the Oak Haven district, had not been seen outside her home for nearly 6 months. She used to maintain a large vegetable garden in her front yard, but it had completely overgrown with weeds. The neighbor noted that the woman's monthly pension checks were still being cashed at the local bank. They were being deposited by a younger man claiming to be her grandson, and occasionally by a woman claiming to be her grandson. According to the county records attached to the file, the elderly woman did not have any living children. Her only daughter had passed away decades ago, and she had no grandchildren. I printed the documents, grabbed my agency clipboard, and walked out to my car. The drive to her property took nearly an hour. The town slowly gave way to sparse, rural development, which eventually transitioned into the dense, shadowed pines of Merrow. The road narrowed into a cracked, unpaved dirt path. The trees here grew incredibly close to the shoulder, their heavy branches interlocking over the road to block out most of the late afternoon sunlight. The house sat at the very end of the dirt road, positioned mere feet away from the heavy tree line. The forest seemed to lean over the property, casting long, dark shadows across the rotting wood of the front porch. The vegetable garden was completely dead, choked out by aggressive briars and thick vines. I parked my car in the gravel driveway, shut off the engine, and sat in the silence for a moment. There were no birds singing. The air felt heavy and incredibly still. I stepped out of the car and walked up to the front porch, then raised my hand and knocked firmly on the front door, announcing my title and the agency I work for. I waited for a full minute. There was no movement inside. I raised my fist to knock again, but before my knuckles could strike the wood, the door swung open smoothly. Standing in the doorway were two people, a woman who looked to be in her mid-40s and a young man who looked to be in his early 20s. They were both dressed in remarkably clean, casual clothing. The woman wore a floral blouse and pressed slacks. The young man wore a plain gray sweater and dark jeans. At first glance, they looked like an ordinary, well-kept family. But as I stood on the porch looking at them, a deep, primal wave of unease washed over my entire body. My brain instantly registered that I was looking at something wrong, even before I could articulate exactly what it was. It was their posture. They stood side by side, perfectly straight, with their arms resting entirely limp at their sides. They were not leaning against the doorframe or shifting their weight. They were entirely motionless. "Good afternoon," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I am a social worker with the county. I am here to conduct a wellness check on the homeowner. May I come in?" The woman smiled. "Good afternoon," she said. "You are here to conduct a wellness check." She repeated my sentence back to me, but the cadence was off. "Yes," I replied, gripping my clipboard a little tighter. "I need to speak with her directly." "Are you her family members?" The young man smiled. "We are her family members. I am Nalom. She is Adilna. We provide excellent care." "I appreciate that," I said, forcing myself to maintain eye contact. "But standard procedure requires me to speak with her in private. It will only take a few minutes." I took a deliberate step forward, pushing my weight slightly toward the threshold. Usually, people will naturally step back to allow someone entry. The woman and the young man did not move. They held their ground, standing like statues in the doorway. "She is resting," Adilna said. "She does not wish to speak in private." "I am afraid it is not optional," I said firmly. I relied on the authority of my position, pushing past my growing fear. "If you refuse to allow me access to the homeowner, I will have to return with law enforcement. It is much easier if you just let me see her." Adilna and Nalom slowly turned their heads to look at each other. "You may speak with her," Nalom said. They finally stepped backward, opening a path for me to enter the house. I stepped over the threshold into the living room. The house was clean, but it was sterile in a way that felt completely unnatural. There was no clutter, no personal items, no mail on the tables. It looked like a stage set. "She's in the bedroom," Adilna said, pointing a stiff finger down a narrow hallway. I walked down the hall, keeping my back to the wall so I could keep them in my peripheral vision. They remained standing in the living room, watching me go. I reached the end of the hallway and pushed open the bedroom door. The curtains were drawn tight, blocking out the light, and the room was illuminated only by a small bedside lamp. Lying in the center of a large bed was the elderly woman. The breath caught in my throat. She was severely emaciated. Her skin was stretched tight over her bones, paper-thin and heavily bruised. She looked incredibly frail, as if a strong breeze would shatter her completely. Her eyes were wide, sunken deep into her skull, and darting frantically around the room. I stepped into the bedroom and quickly pulled the door shut behind me, engaging the small push-button lock on the knob. It was a flimsy lock, but it gave me a moment of separation. I walked up to the side of her bed. "Ma'am," I whispered gently, "I am a social worker with the county. I am here to make sure you are safe. Can you hear me?" The old woman stared at me. Her chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a dry, rasping sound came out. She raised her trembling, bruised hand and pointed weakly toward my clipboard. I stepped closer, unclipped the metal clasp, and handed her the stack of blank agency forms and my pen. She grabbed the pen with a desperate grip. Her hand shook violently as she pressed the ballpoint against the paper. She wrote quickly, pressing so hard the ink tore through the top sheet. She finished writing, dropped the pen onto the blanket, and pushed the clipboard back toward my chest. Her eyes were wide with terror, pleading with me to understand. I looked down at the paper. Written in jagged, frantic letters was a single sentence. "They aren't my family. They came from the woods." A heavy, freezing chill ran down my spine. Suddenly, a sharp, hard knock echoed against the bedroom door. "Is the wellness check complete?" It was Adilna's voice. It sounded incredibly close, as if her mouth was pressed directly against the wood of the door. I moved to the center of the room, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "I need a few more minutes," I called out. "We are still completing the paperwork." "She is tired," Nalem's voice said from the hallway. "She needs to rest. You must leave the bedroom now." The brass doorknob slowly began to turn. It hit the mechanism of the push-button lock and stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, the doorknob twisted violently in the other direction. The cheap metal rattled aggressively against the doorframe. They were testing the lock. "Open the door," Adilna said. Her voice had dropped its pleasant tone. "We provide excellent care. You must leave." I knew that if I opened that door, I was not going to walk out of the house alive, and neither was the old woman. I looked around the bedroom for another exit. There was a single, large sash window on the far wall, looking out toward the front yard and my parked car. I rushed to the window and grabbed the heavy brass latches. They were stiff with age and coated in thick layers of old paint. I slammed the heel of my hand against the wooden frame, breaking the seal of the paint. I threw my weight backward, hauling the lower pane of the window upward. It slid open with a loud groan of protesting wood. The doorknob rattled furiously. "Open the door," the voices outside chanted in perfect, terrifying unison. "Open the door, open the door." Heavy thuds began to slam against the wood. They were hitting the door, trying to force it off its hinges. The thin wood began to bow inward with every strike. I ran back to the bed. I did not have time to be gentle. "I am getting you out of here," I whispered rapidly to the old woman. "Do not make a sound. Hold on to me as tight as you can." I reached under her fragile frame, sliding one arm beneath her knees and the other around her back. I hoisted her upward. She weighed almost nothing. She was incredibly light, like carrying a bundle of dried, brittle branches. She wrapped her thin arms tightly around my neck, burying her face into my shoulder. I turned back to the open window. The bedroom door cracked loudly. A long splinter of wood fractured down the center of the panel. I threw my leg over the windowsill, balancing the weight of the old woman against my chest. I ducked my head and slid through the open frame, dropping down onto the overgrown grass of the front yard. The impact jarred my knees, but I kept my footing. I turned and sprinted toward my car. I kept one arm securely around the woman's legs, using my free hand to reach frantically into my pocket for my car keys. My fingers fumbled against the metal as I ran across the gravel driveway. I reached the driver's side door. I hit the unlock button on the key fob. The headlights flashed briefly, and the locks disengaged with a sharp click. I pulled the rear door open, carefully but swiftly pushing the old woman into the back seat. I slammed the door shut, threw myself into the driver's seat, and shoved the key into the ignition. The engine roared. I threw the transmission into reverse and looked up through the windshield. The front door of the house was wide open. Standing on the rotting wooden porch, illuminated by the fading afternoon light, were Adilna and Naolam. They were just standing there, side by side, completely motionless. Their arms were hanging limp. Their faces were locked in that same empty smile. They were watching me. I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal. The tires spun aggressively against the loose gravel, kicking up a shower of rocks as the car launched backward. I whipped the steering wheel around, aligning the hood of the car with the dirt road, shifted into drive, and floored the accelerator. The car surged forward. The heavy tree line blurred past my windows as I sped down the narrow, cracked path. I checked the rearview mirror constantly. The house grew smaller in the distance. The figures on the porch did not move. I let out a harsh, shaking breath. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles ached. I glanced at the back seat. The old woman was lying flat across the upholstery, her eyes squeezed shut, trembling violently. "We are okay," I told her, my voice cracking. "I am taking you straight to the county hospital. You are safe now." I looked back up at the road ahead. I checked the rearview mirror one more time to make sure nothing was following us. The dirt road behind me was empty. Then, a sudden flicker of movement in the mirror caught my eye. It was coming from the thick tree canopy directly above the road behind my car. I saw Nalum. He had moved through the trees. I watched in disbelief as he stepped off a massive oak branch towering at least 40 feet above the ground. He bent his knees and launched himself forward into the air. The physics of the jump were entirely, horrifyingly wrong. It was a massive leap that defied gravity. He sailed through the air, traveling faster than my speeding car, easily clearing the distance between the trees and my rear bumper. He soared directly over the roof of my vehicle. A heavy shadow passed over the windshield, then landed on the asphalt directly in front of my moving car. The impact should have shattered his legs. He fell from an impossible height, hitting the solid ground with devastating force. But he did not stumble or even roll. He landed perfectly on his feet. Less than a second later, a second shadow dropped from the canopy. Adilna landed right beside him, executing the exact same impossible silent landing. They stood shoulder to shoulder, completely blocking the narrow dirt road. I slammed both of my feet down onto the brake pedal. The anti-lock brakes engaged aggressively, grinding and shuddering as the tires locked up. The car skidded violently across the dirt and asphalt, the heavy momentum pushing us forward. We slid to a halt less than 10 feet away from where they were standing. The dust settled around the hood of my car. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, my chest heaving, staring through the windshield. They had not flinched when the car skidded toward them. They stood perfectly still, but the smiles were gone, replaced by a cold, flat expression of mild annoyance. They began to walk toward my car. They walked up to the driver's side door and stopped just outside my window. Adilna raised her hand. She tapped her knuckles gently against the glass. "Lower the window politely," she said. Her voice was muffled by the glass, but the hollow resonance was unmistakable. I did not move. My mind raced, trying to calculate a way out. I could not reverse, the road was too narrow, and the ditches on either side were too deep. If I tried to run them over, based on what I had just seen them do, I doubted the impact of the car would stop them. I slowly reached over and pressed the button to roll the window down exactly 2 inches. Just enough to hear them clearly. "What do you want?" I demanded, trying to keep the absolute terror out of my voice. Nalum leaned down, positioning his eyes level with the narrow gap in the window. "You must leave the old woman," he said calmly. "She belongs to us. Open the doors and walk away, or we will kill you." He stated it as a simple, objective fact. "If you touch this car, I will call the police," I shot back, gripping my phone in my lap. "I will have every sheriff's deputy in the county out here in 10 minutes. Adilna let out a sound that was supposed to be a laugh. "The police do not matter," she said. "You should know by now that a normal human does not stand a chance in front of alpha humans like us." Alpha humans. The term sounded utterly ridiculous, yet deeply horrifying coming from her mouth. "We can pull you through this glass," Nalum added. "We can break your bones. We can kill anyone who comes here. We can leave you alive, broken, and no one will ever believe what you say. They will say you lost your mind in the woods." He was right. If I survived, if I told the police that people jumped 50 feet out of a tree and landed on the highway, I would be committed to a psychiatric ward. There would be no investigation. I needed leverage. I looked at Nalum's unblinking eyes. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and forced a cold, hard glare into my expression. "You might be able to kill me," I said, keeping my voice entirely flat, "but you can't kill a server." Nalum tilted his head slightly. The first micro-expression I had seen from him, I pointed a stiff finger toward the top center of my windshield, right behind the rearview mirror. Do you see that black box mounted to the glass? That is a high-definition, wide-angle dash camera. It has been recording since I pulled into your driveway. Adilna slowly turned her gaze to look at the small black plastic box. It recorded you standing on the porch, I continued, speaking rapidly, building the threat. It recorded you landing on the asphalt without breaking your legs. It is recording you right now. I leaned slightly closer to the gap in the window. And my agency doesn't use local storage. For social worker safety, that camera streams a live, encrypted feed directly to the county government servers in the main office. The footage is already saved. It is out of this car. If you kill me, when I fail to check in, my supervisor will pull the feed. They will see exactly what you are, and they won't send the local police. They will send the federal government, and they will dissect you in a laboratory to find out what makes an alpha human tick. Silence fell over the road. Nalem and Adilna looked at each other. The rigidity in their posture faltered. For the first time, they looked genuinely uncertain. They communicated silently, staring into each other's eyes, processing the threat. I am offering you a deal, I said, seizing the hesitation. You step away from this car. You let me and the old woman drive away right now. In exchange, I will go straight to the county office. I will access the primary server, and I will permanently delete the entire recording. I will say nothing to the police, and I will tell the agency she had a medical emergency, and I will tell the agency she had a medical emergency, and I brought her to the hospital. You go back to your woods, and nobody ever comes looking for you. Adilna looked back at me. Her expression was deeply annoyed. The skin around her eyes tightened, a genuine, ugly display of frustration. You will erase the record, she stated, confirming the terms. I will erase it from the main server, I promised. Nalem stepped back from the window. We accept the deal, but understand this. We will watch and we will make sure you commit to it. If the record is seen, we will find you. We have a deal, I said. They turned and walked away from the car, moving to the edge of the dirt road. Without a single sound, they leaped upward, disappearing effortlessly into the thick, dark canopy of the forest above. I did not wait to see if they would come back down. I rolled the window up, hit the accelerator, and drove the rest of the way to the main highway at dangerous speeds. I drove straight to the county general hospital, then carried the old woman into the emergency room and handed her over to the medical staff. I told the attending physician I found her in a state of severe neglect and that she required immediate protective custody. Then I drove to my agency office. I went directly to the IT department and invoked a critical HIPAA privacy violation. I told the administrator on duty that my dash camera had inadvertently recorded a highly sensitive, unclosed medical emergency during my wellness check, and that the footage was currently sitting on the main server. The threat of a massive county lawsuit made him panic. He logged into the secure terminal and gave me the keyboard to locate and wipe the specific file to contain the breach. I deleted the primary video from the network, exactly as we agreed. But I made a hard copy first, saving it to my own encrypted flash drive right before hitting the delete key. I am writing this now, sitting in my locked apartment, keeping the lights on. I am leaving this story here as a dead man's switch. If they are watching, if they are tracking my digital footprint to ensure I keep my end of the bargain, I want them to read this very carefully. I kept the video. I kept a record of the address. If I see you standing in the tree line outside my window, or if you ever try to pull another vulnerable person out of this county, I will publish the evidence of your existence to every network on this planet. Stay in the woods. I didn't notice it all at once. And if I'm being honest, I probably wouldn't have noticed it at all if I hadn't started seeing the same flyers over and over again in the same places. The first one was taped to a light pole near the station. I stop at on my way home from work, the kind of pole covered in layers of old tape and paper, where people just stick things without thinking about how many are already there. I remember standing there with the pump running, the smell of gas in the air, glancing at it just long enough to register the photo and the word missing in bold, before looking away and checking how much I had left to pay. A few days later, I saw another one on the same pole, just slightly lower, like someone had tried to make room instead of covering the first. Different person, different name, but the layout was almost identical. Same kind of photo, same formatting, same block of text underneath. I remember pausing a little longer that time, reading through more of it while the receipt printer clicked behind me, trying to figure out why it felt familiar in a way I couldn't place right away. After that, I started noticing them more, not because they suddenly appeared everywhere, but because I had seen enough that they started standing out. One on a stop sign near the apothecary, another taped to the side of a tram stop. I passed sometimes, one partially torn on a wooden post near the square. They weren't all in the same spot, but they weren't far enough apart to feel random either. It was like they were all coming from the same general area, even if I couldn't draw a clear line around it. I didn't connect anything at first. People go missing, it happens, and most of the time, you don't hear anything beyond the initial post. But something about seeing them that often, that close together, made me start reading them more carefully without meaning to. I found myself slowing down when I passed them, taking a second longer than necessary to read the names, the dates, the last seen locations, like I was trying to find something specific without knowing what it was. That's when I started noticing the detail. It wasn't obvious, and it wasn't highlighted as if it were important. It was just part of the description, the kind of sentence you'd skim past if you aren't paying attention. Last seen near, followed by a location, and then sometimes, not always, but enough times that it stuck. A second part added at the end. Last seen speaking with a man. The first time I noticed it, I didn't think much of it, because that's normal, since people are usually seen with someone before they go missing. But then I saw it again on another flyer, with different wording that meant the same thing, like last seen talking to an unknown male, or last seen in the company of a man, and that was when it stayed in my head longer than it should have. At that point, it still felt like coincidence, but I started checking the older flyers too, going back to places I knew they were posted just to read them again. Some didn't mention anyone else at all, but enough of them did that it stopped feeling random. It was always vague. Never a name, never a clear description, just a man. And sometimes they'd add something small like approximate height or clothing, but never enough to actually identify anyone, just enough to confirm someone had been there. I don't know when it shifted from noticing to actually looking, but at some point I started paying attention to the people around those areas more than I normally would. Not in an obvious way, just quick glances while standing in line, or walking past someone on the sidewalk, or waiting at a crosswalk a second longer than needed, trying to see if anyone stood out in a way that matched what I kept reading. No one really did, and that should have been the end of it. But then I saw him. I didn't realize it right away. He was just another person in line at the station, a few spots ahead of me, holding a drink and something small from the counter. Nothing about him stood out. Average height, maybe mid-30s, dark clothes that didn't draw attention. The kind of person you wouldn't remember if you weren't already looking for something. What made me notice him was the clerk, who gave him a quick "hey," like she recognized him, not friendly enough to mean anything, just familiar enough to register. And he didn't really respond, he just set his things down and waited. I remember shifting my weight from one foot to the other, glancing up at the price screen, then back at him again without really meaning to, and that was when it clicked that I had seen him before, not once but multiple times, in different places around town. Near the apothecary entrance, walking past the square, standing near that same tram stop where one of the flyers had been posted. None of those moments had meant anything on their own, but together they felt connected in a way I couldn't explain. I told myself it didn't mean anything, because it's a small town, and you see the same people all the time, but the next time I saw one of the flyers, I read it differently. I stood there longer than I needed to, reading that line again, and then looking up at the street around me without realizing I was doing it. And after that, I started noticing him more, not because he was suddenly everywhere, but because I was paying attention now. He showed up in the same kinds of places the flyers were posted, never doing anything unusual, never drawing attention, and if anything, he blended in too well, like he knew exactly how to move through a space without being remembered. That's what made it worse, because I never saw him with anyone from the flyers directly, but there were moments where it felt like I had just missed something. Like I'd pass him leaving a place and then notice a flyer there a day or two later, Or I'd walk past him on the sidewalk and realize there was a missing person notice posted just a few feet away that I hadn't seen before. It never lined up cleanly enough to prove anything, just enough to sit wrong, and I tried to ignore it after a while by stopping myself from reading the flyers as closely. But once you notice something like that, it doesn't really go away. It just sits there, waiting for something to confirm it, and that confirmation came a few nights ago. I was leaving work later than usual, and the streets were quieter than normal. Not completely empty, but quiet enough that you notice your own footsteps more than usual. I remember adjusting my grip on my phone and checking the time without really needing to, just to have something to focus on while I walked. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, not close enough to feel immediate panic, just there, steady, matching the pace of someone walking in the same direction. When I turned slightly without fully looking back, I saw him. He was walking at the same pace with the same neutral expression, like he was just heading somewhere, and I happened to be in front of him. I looked forward again and kept walking, but I could feel that same tightness in my chest starting to build. I crossed the street at the next opening without making it obvious, and he crossed too, and that was when I swallowed and realized how dry my mouth had become. I slowed down slightly, pretending to check my phone again, and his footsteps adjusted behind me, matching the change in pace. I didn't turn around that time. Instead, I picked up my pace and kept walking until I reached a more populated street, somewhere with enough people that I didn't feel as exposed. When I finally looked back, he was gone. I stood there for a second longer than I should have, scanning the street, but there was no clear direction he could have gone without me seeing him. I told myself I was overreacting, that it didn't prove anything, that I had connected things that weren't actually connected. That worked for about a day. Then I saw the newest flyer. It was posted on the same pole near the station, placed over one of the older ones that had started to peel at the edges. I stopped without meaning to and read it, already knowing what I was looking for before I got to that part. Last seen speaking with a man. This time, there was a description underneath that said, mid-30s, average height, dark clothing, no identifying features. I stood there longer than I should have, reading it again and again until it stopped feeling like coincidence and started feeling like something I should have said something about earlier. When I looked up, he was standing across the street, not moving, not pretending to be busy, just looking directly at me like he had been waiting for me to notice. For the first time, it didn't feel like I had figured something out. It felt like I had been noticed back.